Gamar Chatima Tova. There's a joke among rabbis that we don't actually write sermons for our communities or synagogues. Of course, we hope that you take something away from the sermon. We hope the sermon makes you think, inspires you to act, gives you reason to think. But as the joke goes, the real reason that we give sermons is for something far more self-serving. Writing a sermon is a lot cheaper than seeing a therapist. I thought about this when I decided to write this sermon about losing my mother. And while this sermon on the surface is about my mother and is fitting for today as we will soon recite Yizkor in memory of all of our loved ones, the truth is that the sermon is really about something far more universal: how we can lessen loss, taking away from the pain we all feel from life. Initially, I thought I would write this sermon as a letter to my mother. But the truth is, my mother and I didn't have that kind of relationship. We had a good relationship, and we certainly shared love, but ours wasn't the kind of relationship where we would spend endless hours chatting into the night. Her last few nights alive, I actually had the opportunity to do what we like to do most together. I pulled the reclining chair next to her bed in the hospice, held her hand through the night, and together we watched reruns of MASH. My mother loved MASH, not just because her name was Alda. We would always joke that if my mother married Alan Alda, her name would have been Alda Alda. My mother loved MASH because the show dared to claim that even during war, there can be laughter. In the darkest of times, there is always light. And this was my mother. My mother's relentless positive outlook reminds me of a teaching in the Talmud. Rebbe Meir retains a relationship with Elisha ben Abuya even after Elisha abandons the Jewish community for life as a Roman citizen. Rebbe Meir's students are incensed at the yeshiva. How can their teacher maintain a relationship with an apostate? And they demand that Rebbe Meir provides an explanation. Calmly, Rebbe Meir responds, "I avoid the thorns and pick the flower." This is something that I need to hear, and I suspect that I'm not alone. Avoid the thorns and pick the flower. For many of us, it was a tough summer. Like many of you, I spent every night in June with my heart in my throat as the war in Israel spread. At home, the foundations of our civic civility continued to rot with political violence and corrosive malice. All the while, I personally struggled as part of the sandwich generation, feeling the pull of needing to care for both my children and parents. At this trying time, I was happy to reconnect with the other Alda, not Alda Schuldenfrei, but Alan Alda, and his character Hawkeye Pierce's reminder that even in darkness there is always light. In our own darkness, here's where I see the light. After these 2 brutal years of war, I feel more passionate about Zionism than ever before, with a reignited passion to dedicate my life to helping Israel soar as a virtuous Jewish democracy. From my own personal feelings of political alienation and frustration, I am reminded that people cannot simply be collapsed into political identities: Democrat, Republican, conservative, progressive. People are delightfully complicated and wonderfully textured. Spend enough time with someone and you will find something that you like and a concern that you share. And personally, while I am sad that my mother died too young at 76, I am grateful that she had almost 10 years of life after she first got sick. When her cancer emerged, the excellent care she received gifted her the opportunity to celebrate 2 of her grandchildren's bar mitzvahs, take several cruises around the world, rediscover her love of painting, and celebrate her 50th wedding anniversary to my father in a small ceremony at my previous synagogue with her entire family gathered around the chuppah. So while this has been a tough time, no doubt, Alan Alda's MASH character, Alda Schuldenfrei's example, and Rebbe Meir's teaching all resonate. Leave the thorns and pick the flower. That's the first way we can lessen loss. The second way that we can lessen loss, I learned while preparing for my mother's death. About 1.5 years ago, my mother's cancer returned with a vengeance. From the time of that diagnosis until her passing, nothing that we did seemed to have the outcome that we hoped for. I did my best to help out, checking in by phone every day, and every few weeks stealing away for a day here or there to travel back and forth to Vegas. I will note that my Vegas trips were different than most. Spending the night on hospital cots, eating most meals at greasy cafeterias, and days filled with doctor's appointments, extensive procedures, and endless hours drinking bad coffee in sterile waiting rooms. The whole time, I felt the impossible pull from 2 different directions. From one direction, there was the pull of home, with carpool to drive, school events to attend, homework to help with, synagogue meetings to attend, programs to run, b'nai mitzvah to officiate, and communal responsibilities to fulfill. From the other direction, I felt the pull of my parents, who were facing a lot while coming to terms that they were able to do less and less. Doctor appointments, medical decisions, estate planning, and all the paperwork, all the finances. Being pulled in 2 directions was really hard. And truthfully, I never felt like I was doing it well. When I was helpful in Vegas, I inevitably would be reminded of what I missed back in Los Angeles. And when life in Los Angeles prevented me from going to help in Vegas, it always seemed to leave my parents in a bad place. I never felt like I could win, and I became resigned to loss after loss. this became too much to bear. And so I would like to share what helped and continues to help me get through it. The Torah reminds us of our sacrosanct obligation to our parents. Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. Honor your father and your mother. I humbly suggest an amendment. Honor your father and mother, and remember that there are only 24 hours in the day. Being part of the sandwich generation, where we are called to assist aging parents while raising our own children and living responsible lives, is nearly impossible. There are times that I wish that I was more patient, more helpful, more present, more kind, and more respectful with my parents, with my own family, and with you as my community. I did the best that I could, and it was never perfect. I can only hope that it was enough. And that's the lesson that I hope we can all internalize. Generally speaking, we are living longer, having kids later, working more hours while filling our days with obligation after obligation. And the message of Yom Kippur is that we need to be better, to improve, to live life more fully. But this morning, I want to remind us that it is impossible for me or for any one of us to do it all. Sometimes good enough needs to be enough. It's something that I'm clearly still working on accepting, and something we can probably all use to talk about. Life is complicated and filled with important demands pulling us in all sorts of different directions. To lessen the loss we all feel, we can admit that we simply cannot do it all, and instead we can accept doing the best that we can. The third and last lesson in lessening loss that I want to share is something I was reminded of when mourning for my mother, and that is in the beauty and transformative power of human connection. Immediately following my mother's funeral in New York, the clouds that dominated the morning sky darkened, signaling the beginning of a summer storm. The weather became so intense, I seem to remember hearing somewhere that there was a monsoon advisory. Understandably, that evening, the shiva was small. After most people had left, the door to my sister's apartment opened, and I needed to do a double take. We grew up playing kickball together on Grant Place, becoming the closest of high school friends, and I even officiated at her wedding when I was still in rabbinical school. But close to 25 years had passed since I last saw Heather, and we had long ago lost touch. The storm had kept so many away, but she came to Shiva, and we both knew why. The summer before our junior year of high school, when Saddam was invading Kuwait, leading up to the first Gulf War, Heather's mom got really sick. At the time I was a kid, I don't think I understood just how sick she was. Only that after coming home from my job as a day camp counselor, I knew every day I needed to call Heather to check in. And every day, Heather told me about a new treatment or a kind of medicine, and she spoke with confident optimism and hope they were going to get the cancer. Her mom would be okay. Heather's hope shattered that fall when her mother passed away. During Shiva, every night I walked down Grant Place to her house and sat with her. Late one evening, Heather jokingly complained that the problem with all the chocolates that everyone brought was they didn't come with a glossary or a guide. This was, of course, several years before Forrest Gump made the same observation. But for Heather, I had a solution. No problem, I assured Heather. And I took a chocolate out of its wrapper, bit into the bottom, and shared, "That's nougat." "No thanks," she said. So I took the candy with the small bite on the bottom, stuck it back in its fancy wrapper, and put it on the tray. And for the first time in months, I heard Heather laugh. So that's what we did the rest of the night. Biting bottoms of chocolates, putting the bad ones back, and giving Heather a chance to rediscover her laugh. 35 years later, this time at my mother's Shiva in my sister's apartment, Heather and I found a quiet corner. "Remember the chocolates?" Heather smiled and took my hand after we both wiped away the tears. The death of our mothers helped Heather and I connect as kids and helped us reconnect as middle-aged adults. My reunion with Heather reinforces something I've always known in my head, but now more than ever feel in my heart. When you lose someone, while your heart is torn and broken, almost magically it simultaneously opens to new or reestablished relationships. It reminds me that in the Torah, while both Isaac and Ishmael have a fractured and distant relationship, they connect as adults to bury their father Abraham. The same happens with the twins, Jacob and Esau. After a lifetime of intense hatred, they come together to bury Isaac. Despite the unbearable pain of loss, the soul almost instinctively recognizes that healing can only come by connecting with others. And this is where I think I need to be a better rabbi. Over the course of the next year and next several years, many of us will experience a pain similar to the one I felt this summer. And we need to be there for you to help build the connections that can help your soul from sinking. Of course, I wish my mother was here. Earlier in my career, before she got sick, my mother would have been sitting at services, beaming with pride. She loved seeing me serve as a rabbi. I'm sad that I'll never hold her hand during another episode of MASH or share in her now distinguished light. But there are ways of lessening loss. Last week, when the shofar sounded, I welcomed the new year with hope, because while this past year has been hard, filled with sadness and loss, I remain hopeful for me personally and for us as a community. In the coming year, as I stand to say Kaddish among all of you, may MASH-inspired optimism remind us that when the sounds of the year come out like a broken shofar note, we can choose to pick the flowers and leave the thorns. And that as we move through the year, like the sounding of a tekiah gedolah, maximizing our lives is always a struggle that leaves us short of breath. There is never enough of us to go around. But like sharing a box of chocolates at Heather's mom's Shiva and our hug together 35 years later at my mother's, the connections we build together can and will help lessen a loss, sustain a soul, and affirm that despite the difficulties of life, the new year can and will be filled with sweetness. Gamar Chatima Tova.